Okay, good. So, and then the inevitable question is, well, do I really need to hire an attorney? I mean, you're saying pro se, which means you do it by yourself, um, versus hiring an attorney. So, is this a question of you get what you pay for, or is it your advice, particularly in the startup world where money is slim? Should you do this yourself, or should you hire a lawyer to do it?
Well, if you're talking about a patent, I would always advise that a IP attorney does the application. The reason being is you can get one paragraph, one sentence, a couple of words incorrect. The situation there is the intent of what you want to do is not necessarily translated and interpreted by the examiners who are looking at that patent as being what you want. So if you have an IP attorney, they are the professionals to do it. I always believe that IP attorneys are the very best people to actually write up the documents, applications.
Right. And obviously this is a big subject, so we could spend lots and lots of time on the weeds as to, all these issues and provisional versus non-provisional, international versus US, et cetera, but that's a subject for another day. So, okay, so we understand what intellectual property is in large terms. So what is an intellectual property audit?
Okay, so there are IP audit is an umbrella for 3 different styles of audit. So it's a title line, and you can, let me describe it briefly.
This is just mind-blowing, Dan. You got to check this out. So this is a.
Go ahead. I think somebody tuned in and didn't mute themselves. Go ahead.
Okay, so IP audits, they can be, they're basically a discovery process. At the beginning, say a startup, they're looking for conflicts, duplications of what you have that's already registered. The next stage of an IP audit could be, okay, we need to do a build of an IP portfolio. And then the final stage of a IP audit is the valuation of what you already have. Basically, if a company with, say, 10 patents, 10 copyrights, 10 trademarks is going to be taken over, an IP audit will be conducted by the legal representatives of the company that is acquiring the other company to determine its value of the IP itself.
Right. And as you may or may not know, to the audience, I'm sure you do, that prior to the last couple of years, tangible assets on a balance sheet were basically the determination of the value of a company. Now, because of many, many things, the intangible assets are worth a whole hell of a lot more than the tangible assets. And in some cases, they're the only assets. So more and more intangible assets like intellectual property are determining the value or the valuation of the company. And in addition, there's some loopholes and kind of like figuring out, because a lot of this in general accounting, generally accepted accounting principles or GAAP principles, you often don't see these intangible assets, either valued or appropriately valued on the balance sheet. Is that correct?
That would be correct. The biggest example that I know of in terms of size of company and the amount of IP that they have that is actually disclosed, but you don't know what isn't disclosed, is IBM. IBM has a boatload of IP that is visible on the balance sheet. However, there is one aspect to this, and I'm not sure whether it's changed since I found out about it 3 years ago, is that IBM and Sony of Japan have a large lab in Switzerland, just building innovations and slapping IP on them and just building them into portfolios. I don't know if that, apparently it's a massive machine. And I don't know if that sits on any balance sheet anywhere with IBM.
Yeah. And unless I'm mistaken, I think IBM is the largest, if not the one of the largest patent filers in the United States. Something like 100 a day. I mean, some ridiculous amount of patents.
Oh yes, their in-house IP attorneys are probably grateful every morning that they open their eyes and go to work. But yeah, we're going to do another 100 today.
Okay, so you've already alluded to the why. So we've talked about what is IP, we've talked about what is an IP audit, and you've sort of alluded to the why do the audit. And I heard you say generally it comes down to because you should, and 2, because you have to. And in other words, if someone wants to buy your company, they're going to do due diligence, they're going to do an IP audit, so you have to. They're not going to buy your company unless it's part of the due diligence. Are there other reasons other than those why you should do, particularly a startup, like, because they got a million things on their plate, and why would I even bother doing this 3 weeks into creating the startup?
Well, the start of this point is that IP is misunderstood as far as valuation is concerned. We've just touched that with IBM. So as a startup, they're typically very, very good or excellent at what they are going to do. And that is their area of expertise. However, IP never, ever crosses their mind in 99.999% of startup world. And I've only found one, which was actually out of CU Denver, and the business school there. It spun out of there, and their IP portfolio is okay. What is your goal with this startup? And as 95 out of 100 will say, we want to sell it. If it's not 100 out of 100, we want to sell it. We want to build this company and sell it. Okay, so if you go right back to the beginning, IP portfolio build sits there because the number one mantra of the 5 mantras of any investor is intellectual property. What you have, you own it. Simple as that. So one should always do a plan right from the beginning. Okay, we're sat here. This is going to be your startup. What is your goal in 5 years, whatever your timeline is, to do with this company? And usually it's to sell. And okay, let's go back to the beginning. And this is what you've got. What I recommend, and let's reference this with AI, is that we start building a program where you're going to file copyrights. And you're going to build this portfolio. And then when you're ready, about 6 months prior to ready to launch your product into the marketplace, then we should look at, okay, is it going to do one thing or is it going to do 10 things? And we should look at either a trademark if it's one thing, or 10 trademarks if it's different, 10 different things. And then this has an asset value because intellectual property is hard currency.